My name is Mike Weemus, and I just wanted to thank you for a great class in junior.
Oh, my pleasure. I try to do my best.
This is really good. I really admire your computer skills. I still don't understand how you do that so quickly.
Oh,
It's
well,
really impressive, though.
it's just this thing. It's free.
Let's practice on it to come, though. I mean,
Yeah. So what? So yeah. It's PDF Exchange viewer, so it's just download it.
okay.
But the trick that I discovered is that it's super customizable. So I created all these shortcuts, like all these lines and all these things. So yeah, it's not perfect, but I'm working on some JavaScript version of my dream thing to teach with math integrated and spell checking and lines, and yeah, that would be
That sounds super
awesome.
cool.
It's mostly my friend is working on that part time, so that would be awesome.
You should sell that instead of, you should sell it to the university instead of
Yeah.
Pearson. Your stuff is way better.
Oh
than
yeah, but
theirs.
Pearson is Pearson is the material, and frankly, it's not that good. So
I don't think so either.
so, but just a way of teaching, because my word writing on the board is terrible. Plus, you know, so I'm native French, so whenever I want to write something, and I'm like, oh yeah, but in English, is it two M's, one M, and oh, that's just yeah. So I think these things would be.
You know, my wife is a translator, by the way.
Yeah.
She's really impressed that you're able to do class in English. It's
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh well.
You're,
Thanks for that.
thanks so much.
Okay, why don't we start? Welcome to the last class of the semester. I was thinking maybe if I still have some few minutes after the end, I could do some exercises, but I've checked the program and yeah, still some concepts to see. So I expect we will have just the right amount of time to finish. Anyways, if you have special requests for one exercise, I can, or just come to see me on office hours after the class. Okay, so we left here infant industry argument. So what is the idea there? The idea is you have to assume that there are increasing returns to scale. So if you have a very tiny industry, then it's not going to be efficient. It's better to import. But if you believe strongly that if you had a very large industry, you could just use your local demand, which would be enough to satisfy this big industry. And it would be enough to get enough gains from these returns to scale to have actually lower price than the international price. If that's the case, then it's awesome. You get a nice new industry with many workers working in it, and you pay lower than the international price. So is it a good argument? Well, I can draw these curves and I can convince anybody that it's true. But is that the question is it true in reality? Might be, but more often than not, that's from experience, that's not necessarily what we've seen. So this is why I'm saying the Chinese economy as an example is I find it strange because actually China, before being rich, or not rich, but actually emerging into a sort of middle class status as it is now, China was not very, didn't have a very big purchasing power. And so how would you rely on local demand for your infant industry? Anyways, that's not what China did. China relies on the relied on the global industry, global demand, and had a nice export-led growth since many decades. So this is how successful countries have been able to emerge generally. And infant industry, we don't have that many convincing examples, in my opinion. All right, so yeah, so this in 2 words, that's what they say here. So so they could potentially increase the national income and by protecting infant industries and subsidizing strategic firms, but yeah, it has to be strategic and well thought of. Otherwise, it's just going to subsidize not so productive firms and create this essentially subpar products for your local people. So it's not that good. So this is, in my opinion, one of the best arguments for protectionism, or yeah, these are other arguments for protectionism that you may hear sometimes. Well, keep the money at home. This is a very old argument. This is yeah, probably essentially. Mercantilism. So keep the gold, play soldier, and win war. Yeah, so that's what people were used to think back then. So they wanted to discover the new world and bring back lots of precious metals so they could have a powerful army and invade France or Spain or Germany or whatever. And yeah, so Adam Smith and Ricardo and all the others explained that no, you don't have to invade your neighbors, you can just trade with them. Apparently, some dictators right now think that it's still better to invade your neighbors, but yeah, mostly modern people, we tend to think that if I can just buy the minivan from you, then I don't need to invade you. get it. Protect against low wage foreign labor. What's up with that one? Well, the thing is, if you're generally rich country, well, your labor force should be more or less educated. And whenever you have an educated labor force, then if you face a less skilled labor force or low wage foreign labor force, then it's not going to compete against your workers, it's going to complement them. So workers in, say, Canada can design a new product, and then workers in China can assemble it. There's nothing wrong with that. So again, this is a win-win situation. So yeah, low wage. Workers are not a threat to highly skilled workers. So I don't know if some of you are fans of South Park, but yeah, they oftentimes have the labor union who says, "Oh, they took our jobs." So what's going on with that? Well, it's really people who really feel that they're competing directly against whoever else, immigrants or people in other countries. So it is true that if you are competing directly against them, if you know that they can do exactly the same thing as you can, then that's just basic supply and demand. It means more supply of the same, so it's going to deteriorate your wage, no question. The question is, do you want that? So do you want to be the country that keeps their? So imagine if we wanted to say, oh, in Canada we want to keep our nice cloth industry and protect our t-shirt fabrication jobs. Oh, right, but maybe it's better just to not be producing t-shirts in the first place and have more interesting jobs and actually have these t-shirts just made for us by other people. There's nothing wrong with that. But the people who do sew the fabric, in the short run, they're going to hurt, of course, if they have to find another job. So some people are going to be hurting, but not necessarily most people. Export good, import bad. So that's lots of people think that. So yeah, pretty sure Donald Trump thought that, and that's why he had this trade war with China. So that's just it's another of the same mercantilism argument. So yeah, shooting yourself in the foot if you think that. No, it's the idea. So even as a country, imagine you run a big trade deficit, so you import much more than you export. So the US has trade deficit. So what does that mean? Essentially, it means that they import flat screen TVs from other countries, and the other countries are ready to accept their green piece of paper with American president on it. What's wrong with that from an American perspective? We get TV, you get paper. As long as you care to do that, we don't have any problem with it. So it's yeah. So this idea that it's you should always export and not import is not super convincing for economists. Create domestic jobs. Well, that's a bit the same as number 2. So, well, so it depends which job you want to create. Ordinarily, we like creating like highly skilled jobs that would give good income for people. So if we open to trade with people with different skills, that's all the best. There is maybe one exemption that's linked to what we've been discussing earlier on with oligopolies and monopolies. So doctors in Quebec. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't say that. That's more linked to migration. That was my idea that doctors in Quebec would like to restrict immigration of other doctors to keep their monopoly and highly skilled job, but that has to do with migration. So I'm not going to confuse you with. Essentially, migration is the way to trade not in goods but in human capital. But so the same ideas, same set of ideas can go. All right. So yeah, these are not necessarily very convincing. In the short run, they might have merit because any adjustment hurt people who have invested their lives in their job and are losing their job. In the long run, though, I mean, so more trade is usually better. Oh, right. So everybody understands these points. That's super clear. No, I'm going to I'm going to draw the graph that they didn't care to draw. So what's going on there? It's so imagine that you have supply demand, international imports and tariffs. What maybe going on? Local demand, local supply, and then we have imports. So there are going to be, yeah, so this is price. I think they say it's PD, but I find it very strange that they use PD. So it's the international price at which you import goods. And then the question is, what happens if you impose a tariff? So what's a tariff? It's a tax that you impose on products that enter your country. And so you want to impose that to, of course, again, restrict the imports and protect your local industry. So what's going to happen? Well, the tariff is like any tax is going to increase the price of these imported goods. Here, what we assume that the international supply is perfectly elastic. And so imagine that for every good that enters, this is the price that you have to pay to get it on the international market. But then you have this extra tariff that you pay to get it into your country. So then the price would be PD plus. Okay, so yeah, and they have all these Q's there. So before having a tariff, you have quantity. This, and after the tariff, here and here. Yeah, and I think okay, under free trade, domestic production is Q0 and domestic consumption is Q1. All right. So Q0 is here. Q1 is here. If I can even have some mini code that would be even better. All right. And then they say that you have something like Q2, I think, and Q3. All right. Okay, so what's going on there? Well, as we've seen, without any tariff, you would have this equilibrium price and quantity if you didn't have any import. But then what happens is consumers have the choice between buying local on this red supply curve or global on this black supply curve at the international price. So of course, they're never going to accept to pay anything higher than the international price. And so the only quantity that's going to be produced locally is Q0. And then they're going to buy. So this is their demand curve. Okay, so they're going to buy until their demand is the price they're ready to pay is lower than the international price. So it's going to be Q. And so what happens if you have this restriction, these tariffs? Well, you see that now consumers are going to be willing to buy less because they have to pay one, the international price, plus two, the tariff. And so they're less well off. But then what happens to local producers? Are they happy or sad with the tariff? Yes, they are happy because now all of these new units are going to be produced locally because they don't have to compete against a very low international price. They have to compete against the international price plus the tariff. And so they are back in business a bit somehow. So they make all of these extra new units. All right, so before tariff. So imports are Q1 minus Q0 after the tariff. Imports are Q3 minus Q2. Yeah, so I think here what they mean is Q0, Q1. So they show on the, so yeah, imports are Q0, Q1, and after they are Q2, Q3 or something. I find it strange to label it like this, but so it's not a multiplication. But I'm not going to change it because I know that at the exam they use the same convention, but it's not multiplied or anything. What is the tariff revenue for the government? Anybody knows? Oh, now we have don't have the same source of knowledge as we usually get. So now everybody gets to participate. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's whatever is imported. Well, after the tariff, what's imported is Q3 minus Q2. And what is the tariff imposed on this? It's this distance there. So exactly. So it's 8 times. All right. And so what's gained, what's lost? Yeah, I can let's have a green box there. That's the income from this box there. Right. And then what's gain, what's lost? So the gains for producers is this. Yeah. So let's have. So I think they have 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the producer, well, before they just had this very tiny producer surplus. Now they have this large one. So they gain this region one. What's the loss for consumers? They can tell, imposing the tariff. So, discussion going on. Region 4, yeah, that's loss, but for consumers, is it the only thing that's being lost? So the surplus for consumers used to be this huge triangle right there. It's everything below the demand curve and above the price. And now that the tariffs in place, it's just this small zone there, right? So the consumers lose a lot of money. Yeah, so because one, they buy less, and two, they pay more money. So the total loss for consumers is 1. They use all of that. And so the tariff gain for the government is 3. And so what's the net benefit or net loss? Well, the government gains 3, producers gain 1, but consumers lose 1, 2, 3, 4. So the net loss from the tariff is 2 plus 4. So that's the net weight loss. Yeah, so 2 plus 4 is just pure waste, something that could have made people happy because they could have bought the stuff cheap, but that's being lost because of loss of transactions. All right. So that's essentially what's going on with the tariffs. I'm going to say more things briefly. Oh yeah, and by the way, so what's being lost for the importer? That's the right answer. So nothing is lost for the importer. How do we know that nothing is lost? Well, whenever your supply or your demand is perfectly elastic, it means that you're perfectly indifferent between selling infinite quantity, selling zero quantity. So it essentially means you don't gain anything from this transaction, and you don't lose anything if you lose that transaction. For importers, they just say, if you buy at PD, then whatever you do locally, if you impose this tariff T, then we're fine, we don't care. So is that the case or not? Well, it's the case in the context of that small country there. What is essentially assumed is that from the perspective of this small country, the demand is perfectly elastic. But if you imagine that we had a huge, so imagine it's the US and say Canada, so for instance, and it turns out that the US loves Canadian imports. And so if they decide to restrict Canadian imports, then it's going to hurt us a lot. So it's not true that from the US perspective, this supply would look perfectly horizontal, since Canada is a small country and the US is a big market. So it would look more the opposite. So it would more look like the demand from the US is perfectly elastic, but the supply from Canada is inelastic. All right, so that wouldn't be a nice analysis. It's just, it works if you imagine that the country is small and the international suppliers are a very big industry. All right. Okay, so tariff T, so this is just seeing what we did there. So per unit raises the domestic price to tariffs of $T per unit raises the domestic price to PD. That's so. Oh, all right, all right. I see what they wanted to do. All right, so this is okay. It makes more sense to me. This is PW, and this is PW plus T equals. Yeah, so the domestic price and the world price. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So domestic consumption falls to Q3 and domestic production rises to Q2. Producer surplus increases to by area 1, decreases by for consumer surplus by 1, 2, 3, 4, and the imports fall to Q2, Q3. So yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So is that what's the point then of imposing a tariff if there's no gain, no loss whatsoever, or rather there's no gain for it looks like there's no gain for the local market, especially well, unless you are on the side of the producers, then there's a gain. But if you're on the side of the country as a whole, it looks like it's bad. And incidentally, so it looks like the only thing that's going to happen is that local consumers are going to consume less and finance this extra hidden tax. And by the way, so we recently witnessed a trade war between the US and China. And so what economists have been trying to measure this. So the question was, how much of the increase in tariffs just was realized in terms of increase in domestic prices? And then, so I have the numbers there. Yeah. So, let's try the one. So US grows average tariffs by, I think it was 5.65%. And the local price of Chinese imports rose 4.6%. So it's pretty close. It's not one-to-one, but it really looks like it was just a hidden tax paid by Americans on their purchases of Chinese imports. So it really looks like they're just shooting themselves in the foot. Essentially, it doesn't accomplish anything positive. And so this is essentially the picture you're always going to see when we talk about tariff. It looks silly. So why would people think that it would be good to do this? So I'm just going to explain to you a bit what they have in mind. So what they have in mind is that the international supply is not perfectly elastic. So it would look like this. Would look like a normal supply and demand. So if you have this, demand, which would be not perfectly elastic, but somehow inelastic, like this. Then if you impose some tax, then you see that compared to the initial situation, then some of it would be paid by China, actually. So this part there would be less, pure loss to from China's perspective. So if the international supply is not perfectly elastic, then tax or tariff we capture some surplus from importers. And so if you add, say, a trade war between Canada and the US, and the US imposes tariffs, then you can bet that it's going to hurt Canadian importers, or trade war with Mexico, for instance, and the US decides to impose tariffs, then that's going to capture some of the local Mexican surplus, and it's going to make money for the US government. So that's what they hope. The thing is, so it looks like, so it looks like it may have worked a bit, but not all that much. Why? Because China doesn't just export to the US. China exports to Canada, Europe, all Africa, many parts of the world. So the US is, they may think that, oh, we're so awesome and so important, but yeah, they're not the only place in the world. And so their trade war wasn't all that successful, and economists were not very convinced by it. All right, so this is, of course, you're not going to see this at the exam. This is just me that's telling you what happens if this assumption of perfect elasticity is not the case. Then you're capturing some of the, all right. So we have 2 and 4 are the deadweight loss, 2 and 4, as we've been saying. And yeah, the government receives a tariff revenue close to area 3. That's this one. And the sum of area 2 and 4, or yeah, deadweight loss of the tariff. All right, so a tariff imposes costs on domestic consumers, generates benefits for domestic producers, generates revenue for the government. The overall effect is negative. A tariff generates a deadweight loss for the economy. That's saying again what we've been saying. Okay, import quota. What's the difference? Very little. Import quota says, okay, we're, instead of allowing any amount of product to enter the country, so imagine instead of allowing Q1 minus Q0 imports, we're going to set some quota, which would be something like Q3 minus Q2, so a limited quantity. Yeah, and so what's the difference? Well, the only difference is that if you impose a quota, then exporters who export to your country, they're going to say, oh, well, now we know that the price we're going to be able to charge for our products is not going to be this low price right there, because the quantity is not that high. So it's going to be this higher price there. So the only thing that's changing is who gets the extra money from the higher price. So before it was going directly to the government as tariff money. Now it's not going to them, so it has to go somewhere. Well, it's just going to be kept by exporters. So that's why, generally speaking, exporters, they prefer quotas to tariffs, because okay, they cannot export as many things as they would like, but at least they get to charge a higher price. So it's more palatable for them. On the other hand, it means that the government doesn't get the money for it. But it looks, otherwise it looks exactly the same. Direct quantity restriction raises the price received by foreign suppliers of the goods, so to PD from PW. Tariff leaves the foreign supplier's price unchanged yet. So for the tariffs, they get the international or world price. Quota, they get to charge the higher price. And by the way, realize that it's exactly what happens with quota locally. You may remember that when we impose a local quota, what's happening is local producers say, oh, well, the quantity is restricted, so I'm going to be able to charge a higher price for my product. Same impact as a quota. Yeah. So essentially, once you understand tariffs, then quota is the same, but the only difference is this zone 3 doesn't go to the government, it goes to the exporters. Yeah. So in general, quota and a volume equivalent tariff have different welfare implication for the two countries. So the exporting countries prefers the quota because they keep the money. Importing country prefers a tariff. Yeah, there was this US-Canadian softwood lumber dispute. You may have heard of this. This has started 30 years ago, I think, more or less, the first complaints. And it's not over as of today. So they're still fighting over it. So yeah, when skilled liars get involved, then they can drag the thing. So basically, what's going on with the softwood lumber dispute is lumber producers in the US say that it's unfair. The price of Canadian lumber is too low, so we're getting we're having a hard time competing against them again. So if I'm a American lumber user and I have the choice between buying Canadian or buying an American, then I'm very happy that I get cheap Canadian lumber. I would like to buy that, but US policy is we're going to protect our local lumber industry and get our US manufacturer to pay a high price for their lumber. So again, it's taking sides. So yeah, from an American's perspective, they should be happy to receive cheap lumber. Imagine that Canada said, oh, we're going to be super extra nice to you. We're going to give you for free our lumber. Any country would say, well, great, you give us free stuff, we take it. That's but no, in terms of trade, there's always this. The thing is, the local industry has a huge political power, and they always pressure their elected official to protect them and impose tariffs. And so yes, so Americans still pay a higher price than they should for their lumber. Yeah, so in that case, what would happen is, so Canada would prefer to having import quotas because then at least they would get the extra money from the higher price. And yeah, the US would get more money if they impose the tariff. And yeah, they've been using both things. So generally, the thing that they use is countervailing duties against dumping, which is yeah, it's something else, I would say. So they're essentially saying that Canada is dumping its wood on the US, and then they have the right to unilaterally impose countervailing duties to match the difference. So Yeah, and the thing is, so the court never said that you have the right to impose that. They just did it and then they go to court and say, yes, but we had the right to do that. So they can just drag and drag and drag the thing and make Canadian lumber producers go bankrupt before they give up. Yeah, speaking of the devil, dumping. So what is dumping? Yeah, so what is dumping? So it goes back a while ago, and it in some cases, what yeah, industry in rich country had surpluses, and they would think. So imagine that you have a huge agricultural surplus. So if you try and sell it locally, so in Canada, for instance, then the price is just going to drop. So that's why we have so the local Canadian or even Quebec farmers manage their supply, and they just destroy the extra production because they really want to keep the prices high. So we pay them extra high price. But imagine the following. So rather than just having Canada to sell their product, they could also sell it somewhere else. So they may say, okay, well, we're just going to keep a small volume of sales in Canada to keep the price high in Canada and sell the rest to some other country. A cheaper price maybe, but still a price that's good for us. And who cares about the local production? So what's going to happen in the local for the local industry is they get some year super high extra volume of say commodity to sell. So the local producers in the importing countries, they have a very hard time keeping staying in business. So if this goes on for a while, then it's the same as the idea of wood production. So it's good to just always have cheap goods. Problem is if, for instance, you did 1 year and then you stop the next year, so it's just very bad for local producers. So essentially, they have been saying, yeah, dumping is illegal. You shouldn't do it. So what kind of okay, let me draw like super quickly what would dumping would look like. I'm not going to explain it all that much more, but here it is. So, by the way, dumping requires market power, otherwise you cannot do that. Okay, so we have local demand. And then you have marginal revenues. This is demand. This is marginal revenue. And you have your marginal cost. Okay, so you're a Canadian producer, a farmer, for instance, or you sort of have a cartel of farmers in Quebec. And then usually what you would do is maximize your income by choosing marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and then selling at a high price in Quebec. But then what you can do is sell internationally too. What will this look like? Well, imagine that you have this international price in yellow there. So this is PW again. And so here in this zone, what would happen? It's a zone in which the marginal revenue of continuing to sell in Quebec becomes very, very low. But you don't have to face this low marginal revenue because now you can sell the same units at the world stage. So you don't depreciate the Canadian price. So you still, so you have, yeah, you have this extra outlet for your production. And so what you're going to do is decide, okay, I'm going to sell not that quantity to Canada, but this smaller quantity and charge this extra high price in Canada. So that's the extra high price that Canadians have to pay. Domestic. And you're going to export all of this until marginal cost equals marginal revenue, which is the international price. All right, so this is what would happen. Now, I don't want to spend any more minutes on this because we still have stuff to see. But essentially, what you can see is that the situation is that, so in Canada, we get ripped off, we pay a super high price. But at the world, on the world level, what happens is you have marginal cost equals price. So that's perfectly efficient. So that's why economists are sort of not that mad about dumping because, well, if it's something that goes on year after year after year, because essentially it's an efficient thing that would occur. So they get cheap stuff. It's just bad inside Canada. Yeah, so if dumping lasts indefinitely, then it can just be a gift to the receiving country. Its consumers get goods from abroad at lower prices than they would otherwise from their local industry. So, but yeah, at the international stage, usually there is this protection against dumping. So, but economists are not so happy with this notion. Okay, so yeah, anti-dumping laws were first designed to permit countries to respond to predatory pricing by foreign firms, but more recently it's been used as protection to protect domestic firms. So, like in the Canada-US lumber dispute. So what they do is they impose countervailing duties. So that's a tariff that you impose on the country that you accuse of dumping to offset the low price and make the price, the local price, the same as the price in the exporting country. So you just impose a tariff that's equal to this difference there, so that essentially the dumping goes away. Yeah, but often it's thinly disguised protection. So especially the US, they're very skilled at just disguising their protectionism in many different ways with very skilled lawyers, but it's just protection. All right. So this is, so now the hard part of your mind is finished. Now it's just a description of a few points there. GATT and the WTO. So this is the major set of international organization to promote world trade. So the GATT was started after World War II, and so it was really impactful. So it decreased tariffs on most commodities around the world. Farming is a big exception, but yeah, still it's before that there was a huge protectionism, and now it's been yeah, trade has been much freer. GATT was replaced by the World Trade Organization. Through various rounds of negotiation, the average level of tariffs has declined considerably since 1947. Then we have regional trade agreements. So to liberalize trade over a much smaller group of countries that than the WTO membership. Yeah, they're called free trade areas. I'm sure you've heard of them. So yeah, so usually you have free trade area, custom unions, or and common markets. Custom unions are often seen. What they are is, first of all, we remove quotas, we remove customs between ourselves. So that's what happened in Europe before it was the European Union. So you remove tariffs or other protection against the people inside the custom union, but then you have to make sure that the tariffs facing the rest of the world is the same. Otherwise, say for instance, if Spain has a very low tariff on imports of whatever, of cars, then all the cars would enter the European custom union through Spain and then get freely distributed inside the custom union. So to make sure that it makes sense, then it has to be that, yeah, the tariffs are the same facing the rest of the world. This is, and by the way, so a very interesting thing happened with the China-US trade war. As soon as the trade war started, the US put tariffs on Chinese imports, but then you saw that countries like Vietnam saw a surge in imports and a surge in exports at the same moment, and for very similar looking goods. And so what happened there? Well, of course, so the Chinese exporter, they said, okay, well, we can't export to US in traditional means, they just export to Vietnam and then change the sticker made in China to made in Vietnam and then export that to the US. Again, that's a way to go around the exports. So whatever you have trade policy or policy in general, you have to be very, very careful to tailor it precisely and correctly. Otherwise, people are always going to outsmart you, whatever you try. And so, yeah, that's so. Let's just say Trump wasn't able to outsmart everybody, as even though he said he would. All right, so free trade area is an agreement among two or more countries to establish tariffs and trade among themselves, and each remains free to set their own tariffs. So again, this is not so clever, because then, yeah, there's a risk that that goods are going to enter by one country and enter in the other. So custom unions are better. Yeah, so common set of barriers against imports from the rest of the world. Then common market is what the European Union was just before becoming a monetary union as well. Yeah, so you have had provision that labor and capital can move freely between among members. And that's what freaked English a bit. The fact that labor and other stuff could move so freely, so they decided to leave the European Union. So we had the Brexit right there. They voted to leave the European Union. Economists were not super positive about this decision, but yeah, that's their choice. So generally, economists didn't think that the European Union in general was a terrific idea, in the sense that the countries speak different languages and have different policies, and the European Union expanded very quickly. So it created problems, and it was quite unpopular back then. But it doesn't mean that even if the European Union has its flaws, it doesn't mean that leaving it is a good solution. So yeah, maybe joining was not a great decision, but leaving is not a great decision either. All right, so trade diversification. We've discussed this a bit. So why do we join free trade agreements that to liberalize trade and create more essentially becoming richer as a whole in the world? And so you get this with trade creation. So it's new trade that's being created thanks to the joining of this of these new unions. And as we've seen, yeah, trade has been increasing extremely fast. So one biggest trade creation is China, Chinese. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot the exact year it was, but yeah. So this has changed the whole world. It's incredible the amount of the way that China has had on the world trade since it's joined the WTO. Yes. Creation of trade creation is the efficient specialization according to competitive advantage. So yeah, China exports goods, services. And by the way, not just from the US. So it does import some stuff from the US, but it's like 1/5 of what it exports to the US. Trade diversification is also yeah, consequence of reduced trade barriers among the set of countries, whereby trade within the group replaces trade that used to take place with countries. So why is it called trade diversification? Oh, trade diversion. Oh, okay, I can't read this morning. I was like, what? Why are they? Yeah, trade diversion. So what happens there is maybe I was trading with some third partners around the world, but then I enter this new exclusive zone, and then I start trading just with them. May be good, may not be good too, because maybe my partners aren't that good as my old trade partners. So this is yeah, maybe good, maybe not that good. So from the global perspective, trade diversion represents an inefficient use of resources. If my new trading partners are not especially efficient at producing stuff, yeah, the main argument against regional trade agreements is that the cost of trade diversion may outweigh the benefit of trade creation. So you create trade with your neighbors, but if your neighbors are not the best, then North American Free Trade Agreement. So this shows again that these slides are quite old because NAFTA was replaced. Which is the Canada, US, Mexico agreement. So it took effect in 2020. Yeah, I think, yeah, 2020. But yeah, NAFTA was a big agreement among yeah, between Canada, US, and Mexico that created a huge amount of trade too. So yeah, dates from 1994. It was an extension of the agreement that was just between the Canada and the US. So including Mexico in the mix was not controversial, but a challenge because Mexico is really different from Canada and the US. But yeah, it was more or less a success. More or less because some part of it were quite controversial. There was Chapter 11, so that probably you're too young to remember that, but that was a provision that said that whenever you can prove that you were about to make money in some other country, if they pass some law that prevents you from making money, then they can sue that country. So obviously the goal of this chapter was to make sure that Mexico wouldn't just expropriate firms, Canadian or American firms that would trade in Mexico. But then the result was that if every time Canada wanted to pass some environmental protection law, then American firms would say, oh, but we're losing business, losing profit. So they would sue the Canadian government to prevent it from introducing new environmental legislation. Not the best idea. And this was removed from the new CUSMA agreement, thank God. But yeah, so that was NAFTA. Other major provisions, so all tariffs between Canada, the US, and Mexico were eliminated as of 2010. A principle of national treatment, so this is not just true for NAFTA, so true for GATT and the WTO too. So what this is the main principle in the treaties is whenever a country, so you may impose a tariff, but we expect you to lower your tariffs as much as possible. But once a US good enters Canada, you are forbidden to treat it differently to Canada-produced goods. So this is what we call national treatment. So because otherwise you could just say, oh, let's have a law that there's a local tax that made in US goods have to impose, so 5% more, for instance. That would just be protectionism as well. So once you enter your good enters the country, it has to be treated exactly the same. Yeah, so but this was not invented by NAFTA at all. It was created way back. Yeah, so again, agricultural products are excluded. Many cultural industries, such as magazine and book publishing. So agriculture is excluded from most agreements. For example, WTO. Why? Because it's very sensitive. It's very specific to countries. It's linked to traditions, and really countries don't want to give up the ability to legislate the local industry. And yeah, so art production, so cultural industries. So there is, yeah, Quebec, like so, yeah, they don't want to give up the ability to support French producers and control the amount of content that is available on TV and at the radio. Of course, now there's YouTube and internet, so it's much more complicated to really control the amount of cultural industry that enters your country, because internet is so open. But in principle, that should be both. Yeah, up to now, that's what government have been trying to. Oh yeah, so we're almost done. Yeah, almost out of time. So today I'm really checking the time because I know that I have to see everything, and I don't have any, and I don't, yeah. Finishing early is not that bad, but finishing late would be. Okay. Trade in most non-agricultural service industries is liberalized and subject to the principle of national treatment. This is, of course, saying that service industries plays a huge role now, much bigger than they used to when GATT was first created in 1947. So yeah, now services are being traded left and right, and it's a great volume great exports from the Western countries. So people complain sometimes, oh, nothing is being produced in the US or Canada anymore. Yeah, but we export so much services that our balance of trade is fine, in my opinion. Yeah. Sure. Um, not trade. Trade. Big exports. And in exchange, they receive so much stuff from Asia, from China, merchandise. A significant amount of government procurement is open to cross-border bidding, though a large part is still exempt from NAFTA. So this means that in principle, if we modernize Montreal Metro, anywhere, so no matter how much you would like to help Bombardier make money and yeah, be competitive, the thing is, if you agree, so I don't know exactly so that's why I wrote in principle. So I don't know the details of when if you want to modernize the metro, how much you need to open to international competition, but that's normally what's also included in treaties like NAFTA. So you say that, yeah, if a firm in the US wanted to make the metro, then they should be allowed to bid on it as well. Result. So industry restructured in direction of greater export-oriented orientation in all three countries, and trade creation occurred. So that's the result of NAFTA. The flow of trade among the three countries increased markedly, but especially so between Canada and the United States. Volume of inter-industry trade also increased. Greatest potential of trade diversion is with Mexico. So the thing is, so imagine that we didn't have NAFTA or CUSMA, then maybe we would import even more from China. But since we're in treaty with Mexico, then okay, it makes sense to import more from Mexico. I don't know, maybe Mexican producers are good, but Chinese producers are good too. So yeah, it's not clear what's best. Well, yeah, something maybe I shouldn't talk about, but so yeah, I don't know exactly the numbers on this. I'm just going to suggest something that you may be thinking about. So yeah, what was a great export from Mexico to the US that we don't usually talk about? So yeah, I don't want to get in trouble. All right, the 2017. Oh, so this is the new agreement, the CUSMA. Yeah, emergence. So the US decided that they would renegotiate NAFTA. So that, yeah, so they displayed the united front on this issue whatever that means. Yeah, so this was, so again, the difference between CUSMA and NAFTA, big difference is Chapter 11 is gone. Otherwise, yeah, I'm not aware of big differences. So supply chains, you may remember what this is the fact that a product is produced in many different places. So it can be invented in one country, but then the raw material can come from some other country. It can be assembled in a third country, then exported back. So think of, say, the Volkswagen Beetle. So Volkswagen is a German producer, but then it was assembled in the Mexican city of Puebla until I think 10 years ago, or maybe a bit more, 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago. So then exported to the US. So again, invented in one place, owned by some people, then produced by some other people, and bought by some other people. And so you have to keep that in mind when you have all these trade agreements. Yeah, that's as of 2018, the NAFTA negotiations were still incomplete, but yeah, so now we had CUSMA is there. Okay, so questions, comments, requests? Everybody happy? So, oh yeah, let me just give you one advice for the exam. So yeah, same advice as before, sleep well and be in top shape, because it's a marathon to answer all of these questions. It's made to be, each question by itself may not be so challenging, but just the volume is such that you may think, oh, well, I answered that question well in MATLAB, I answered that other question well in MATLAB, but yeah, but if you took 20 minutes to do them, you're just going to not get to the finishing line. So that's one thing. The other thing, I saw the exam, and other thing I would really tell you is don't answer too quickly, in a sense that so when you see a question, you may think, oh yeah, I know what this is, and you don't read the question well. So please read carefully. Sometimes there are words that are inserted that change the meaning of a question. So be sure that you're aware of this. And yeah, otherwise it looks like it's going to look like the two midterms. All right. So yeah, so we're out of time. So thanks a lot, and good luck for the final. And come to office hours if you need to write me. Yes. What? Depends how much you got for the rest. But yeah, try to get as good a grade as you can. My advice is get 100% in the final. This is follow my advice. Yes.
Where are your office hours?
Oh, it's in 30 minutes. In my office is 11th floor, 1143 point, I don't know what. So
It's
when
on the outline, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
look at it.
exactly.
I'm sorry. Okay, excuse me, I have a
Yeah.
question.
If I did that, then one of the midterms, will the percentage of the midterm shift it to the final? Because I did really bad in the first.
So no, if you don't write a midterm, then the weight is shifted to the final. But if you do well, then it's just.
But like I did in the first midterm like 55%, and I'm hoping to get better than that. Can I shift the?
Oh no.
Always do that.
So once you commit to writing a midterm, then it's you bought it, you own it.
On
Yes.
the final, which chapter range that mostly is because during the midterm too, it's mostly from 8, 9, 10,
Yeah. So now it's everything,
everything.
but there might be a bit more weight on the last section of the.
Or on the
semester.
last one,
Yeah, exactly.
like 30 and 32, 32 and 33, or is it from the 11?
Yeah, exactly. So, but there are questions on everything.
Because on the midterm too,
Yeah, midterm team was just in that
Yeah.
section. Yeah.
it's focused on the last one. So this time the last one as well.
Yeah. So now it's it's everything, but more
More on the
after
last one.
the content of after the midterm.
Okay, good, thanks.